I'm Alan Watson. This is Cutting Through the Matrix, just talking about the way things really are as opposed to how they're presented to you. And for most folk, of course, as you know yourselves, those who are awake, it's very hard to snap people out of their conditioning. And they are conditioned, scientifically conditioned. Many authors and participants in the conditioning process, many of those who helped draft up the methods and tested the methods in various schools over years, going back as far as the 1920s, wrote about it. People like Bertrand Russell and others. And they worked with Tavistock, and they worked with the British governmental system, and they worked with the Secret Service network of Britain. And they really all worked towards this particular scientifically controlled society. Just yesterday, someone was telling me about some children in a U.S. school where 6- and 7-year-olds come in with their little cell phones there, and they don't look up books anymore. They'll sit at their desks all day, and any questions they have, they just type it into their phone and get the answers. And it's an odd thing, as teachers said, to see young children, such young children, all transfixed on these tiny little screens. But what's noticeable too is that they have no memory. You don't need to remember something, you see, when you can get asked the same question 1,000 times throughout your life, and you just have to punch up the question to find out what the answer is. So why bother remembering anything? And it reminds me of Skinner, when Skinner, the big behaviorist that's risen to an icon amongst the behavioral studies, he says if you want to change society, you simply change something in the environment of the target, basically. The people being the target. That was true of radio for the beginning, because even the BBC was created as a propaganda arm of the British government using radio. And they used various techniques to try experiments on the British populations. They found if they could give them a serial that would come on every day, maybe Monday to Friday, people literally would try and be in the house at a particular time to find out what happened from the previous day. A cliffhanger. They'd always leave you with a cliffhanger. They could alter people's behavior. And of course they used it for incredibly good and well done propaganda. Television was introduced into the home and people stopped talking. When they did talk, they generally talked about what they just saw on television. The parents stopped talking to the children and vice versa. And that's what Skinner said. You just want to change something in their environment to change the people themselves, their behavior. And that was his speciality, behaviorism, altering for the planned society or creating a generation that would grow up never knowing that there had been literally scientifically controlled and modified, you might say. And now you have the cell phones and all the other gadgetry there. We live in an era where big governments who share the information with each other monitor every single citizen on a vaster scale than any tyrant in the world could ever have dreamed of. And we're being taught that it's all quite normal. You know, people talked about the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and it was often said in various books at the time that when intrusion comes into the home, intrusion and the breaking of privacy and surveillance on the citizenry becomes normal, then that's the worst kind of tyranny you can have. And yet we've been trained, very well trained, by experts to accept it all as quite normal. And a generation is definitely growing up. They're definitely growing up already not caring about privacy at all. Privacy is a foreign thing to them. They've been taught to share all their thoughts, all their ideas, all their activities on a kind of open world diary. And where did they get all this from? They got it all from their schools. They got it from the various free services that were put out for them. Free services. Nothing is for free. Your browser that's free isn't free. All these big things that you get for free are part of the military-industrial complex to get your information from you and to monitor you. And Facebook and all the other gimmicks that are put out there to trap people. Again, behaviors have a big part in planning the society and guiding and running it. And they're completely involved and always have been involved in the educational systems. That's the kind of world they're bringing in. A society where no one thinks about privacy. In fact, eventually, you'll be called antisocial. And they'll create social disapproval against you if you are the oddball who says, I like my privacy. Or they'll say, it's none of your business what I'm doing. Because again, totalitarian societies can only relax when every single person is monitored 24 hours a day and is completely predictable. Completely predictable. That's what they're bringing in. The controlled society using social disapproval for those who will not join it. You're the oddball. You could be dangerous. You never know what you'll do. And it's far, far worse than even that I'm talking about right now. Back with more after these messages. Hi folks, this is Alan Watt and we're cutting through the matrix. Computer brain interfaces are all over the place now, and it's an old, not just an idea. They were working on this a long time ago. I think Sweden was the first country to use prisoners, in fact, to actually hook them directly into computers. Back in the 70s even, I remember reading it in the newspapers then. I'm sure other countries were doing the same thing. And the whole idea is not so that you can become some kind of Superman by interfacing. It really was to find out if you can control the individual by using the computer. And we see that's happening today. You can actually control a person by really directing their Pavlovian responses to something, giving them stimulus, in other words, and have them respond. We take all these kind of little stimuli for granted again. We get used to them. We think it's normal. When you go in your car, you're prompted to put on your seatbelt. That's a Pavlovian stimulus, you see. And there's many more types of stimulus out there too. If you use a computer, that's all you get is one little prompt after another. It guides you across a certain amount of action and sequences to take to get what you think that you want, which might not be what you want, but it's definitely what those who made the computer and programmed it want you to do. So you can be altered, your behavior is altered again by putting something into your environment that wasn't there before. The computer brain interface, as I say, it doesn't have to be hooked directly in. It can be wireless. And they've been working on that for years too, using animals, and I'm sure people too, along the way. You'll find in military declassified experiments, they always declassify something at least 50 years after an event. And no one cares then because another generation grows up. We don't care what's happened to previous people. It's kind of like it's ancient history to us, and that's why they can declassify stuff. And they've done horror shows in the past on experiments, always on their own subjects. That raises no alarm on the present generation. And we find that the computers now that they're working on supposedly can use magnetic waves to, again, old technology going back to the Corbin helmet a long time ago. They use these waves to literally sense parts of your brain to see what's working. We know the Air Force, we used these for years too with pilots' helmets to try to coordinate their thoughts or their emotions and even muscle movements of their eyes with direction, target finding, that kind of thing. But it's way beyond that now too. They use these things in games. They sell them to children with helmets, and they literally can sense, almost strobe the surface of the parietal lobes and interact with the human itself by anticipating through its program what the subject wants them to do. And it's going to go a lot further than that. They talked in Microsoft, while they were making the helmet, another division of theirs was also working on the same kind of thing without a helmet, where they'd build in the kind of sensory frame around your screen of your computer, and that would literally do the same thing as the helmet did without you having to wear anything. I'm Alan Watson. This is Cutting Through the Matrix, just talking about people like Bertrand Russell and others. And they worked with Tavistock, and they worked with the British governmental system, and they worked with the Secret Service network of Britain. And they really all worked towards this particular condition. Many authors and participants in the conditioning process, many of those who helped draft up the methods and tested the methods in various schools over years, going back as far as the 1920s, wrote about it, the way things really are as opposed to how they're presented to you. And for most folk, of course, as you know yourselves, those who are awake, it's very hard to snap people out of their conditioning. And they are conditioned, scientifically controlled society. Just yesterday, someone was telling me about some children in a U.S. school where 6 and 7 year olds come in with their little